Chapter 12. The Dissertation Defense. Professor Pomyekin had already taken his place in the chairman's seat behind the table that had been placed on the law dais for members of the Scientific Council, but there was still no sign of Buteyko in the hall. Danny the Dreamer's had no luck with his thesis, Pomyekin silently gloated, and wiped a rather puffy cheek with his hand. In recent times his swollen face had started to take on a rather womanly look. The last latecomers were taking their seats in the hall, and his secretary had placed a cut-glass carafe of water before him. "The little blighter obviously went out and drowned his sorrows," the professor thought, putting his own interpretation on Buteyko's absence. And though he knew perfectly well that drink was not one of Buteyko's weaknesses, it suited him perfectly well to think so. Otherwise it was very hard to explain why Buteyko had suddenly asked Pomyekin's deputy for urgent administrative leave, and his wife's evasive answers on this score. And Buteyko's wife Marina was definitely Pomyekin's confidant. Many of Danny the Dreamer's secret preoccupations had been relayed to the professor thanks to her. Professor Pomyekin had told Marina Buteyko he considered her husband to be a great diagnostician, a man whose brilliant career was assured. And oh, how his wife's eyes had glowed at those words. Brilliant, but for the tragic onset of a psychiatric disorder manifest in the doctor's obsession with carbon dioxide. And here Professor Pomyekin had scored a bullseye. Evidently, Buteyko had managed to antagonize his wife with his famous method too. She didn't try to argue, but accepted the professor's hypothesis as gospel. And after a revelation like that, how could Marina Buteyko not help the professor in his battle for her husband's sanity and professional reputation? She told him everything. What Buteyko ate, what he drank, what he said, what she thought he was thinking. She considered it her duty as a wife. Then, suddenly, Constantine upped and offed for a week on business, leaving a pencil-written note in the kitchen. Pomyekin surveyed the assembly hall with a steady gaze and poured himself some water from the carafe. The hall was now nearly 2/3 full. No, he was sure Mrs. Buteyko had not rumbled him, but there are some situations when it is just embarrassing to tell the truth. The CO2 champion had simply gone on a blinder with despair. That was all. What business could he have outside Novosibirsk? Where could he go? Pomyekin rang everyone, and everyone gave the same answer. Academician Parin was out of Moscow at the moment. Well, never mind. Let him go on a bender, then dry out for a while. Perhaps he'd learn to live with things. Professor Pomyekin had just risen to his feet to open the meeting when the hall door suddenly edged open. Pomyekin clumsily sloshed the water at the bottom of his glass. Making a beeline for him down the aisle between the rows was Buteyko, sunburnt, immaculately clad and clean-shaven. Judging by his fresh, focused features, no one could infer, even with the worst will in the world, that he had just torn himself away from a date with a Drambuie. With an inward shudder, Professor Pomyekin accepted the familiar form that Danny the Dreamer handed him. If the ceiling had suddenly fallen in, it would probably have shaken him less. He recognized Academician Parin's dense and florid handwriting. Underestimating Danny's determination had cost the professor dear. If he had realized Buteyko could rustle up a reference from Academician Parin for his oral, Pomyekin might still have been able to do something about it. He was a past master at undercover intrigue, and it would have been nothing for him to have a word with someone in good time and arrange for the requisite number of black balls to torpedo Buteyko's dissertation. Then no reference from an academician could have saved him, still less from an academician who'd been discredited and forced through fire and water by Stalin. He only had time to exchange a wink with the secretary to the Scientific Council, who understood him intuitively. This secured 2 black balls for the redoubtable Danny, which they dropped into the hat with their own hands. But it was too late for this to swing it now, alas. On the contrary, they gave an air of greater objectivity to Buteyko's successful result. And on the 2nd of September 1962, a day on which the professor's skim through the morning newspaper revealed the Soviet people reveling in a bumper harvest in Volgograd, 200 million tons all told, Danny the Dreamer became a PhD. The newspapers claimed the whole country was celebrating an exceptional harvest, but later that night, in the privacy of his own study, Professor Pomyakin wept bitter tears at what he himself had reaped. The prospects were not good for the professor's Nobel Prize. His assumption that the surgical removal of a lung from chronic asthmatics would win him lasting glory was so far wide of the mark. The trials had carried dozens of dogs off to their grave, and the operation didn't necessarily succeed on any human beings either. Unlike Dr Buteyko, Professor Pomyakin had managed to get Ministry of Health endorsement quite quickly, as soon as the first hardy dogs survived. After all, the Ministry of Health's right-hand man was a surgeon too, and receptive to his idea. Unfortunately, endorsement by this highly placed official did not guarantee patients a healthy life with their one remaining lung. Patients were terrified of the operating table, and they were equally terrified at the onset of their next suffocating attack after the operation. Still, there were, of course, some positive things. On the whole, the minuses far outweighed these minor fleeting pluses, but when you have absolutely no alternative, you can be glad of the most miserable fleeting plus. Pomyakin pulled the study door open a crack, made sure his wife was asleep, then shut it tight again. Pomyakin got a bottle of cognac from his bar on the wall and thinly sliced a ripe yellow lemon with a wonderfully aromatic smell. He savoured the flavour of the spirit from his fine crystal wine-glass. He was treating asthmatics on the 3rd floor by cutting out their lungs, while on the 2nd floor Dr Buteyko was getting far more substantial results without inflicting a scratch. The institute had split into 2 warring camps, and there was panic among the patients. The 3rd floor was rapidly gaining the reputation of being some sort of bureaucratic Gestapo. On his rounds he had actually heard one of the nurses persuading an elderly inpatient to think again as he placed one foot on the stairs to Pomyakin's rooms. She didn't realize he could hear her. "Lovey, you shouldn't go up to the 3rd floor," the nurse said, gripping the wide lapels of the patient's striped pyjamas. "Go to Buteyko. He'll make you well without surgery." The terror in her voice made even the professor feel strange. Well, it was quite clear that many patients preferred not to go up to the next landing. Pomyakin chewed on a juicy lemon slice, topped up his cognac, then with his glass on a small saucer moved from behind his massive desk to a neat wooden camp bed covered in a brown woolen throw by the window overlooking the courtyard. What had he not tried in his attempts to drive patients away from Danny the Dreamer? He had blocked up his back door with metal sheeting and instructed the cloakroom attendants not to hang up his patients' coats. On icy Siberian nights, their sheepskin jackets and expensive winter coats lay in a heap in the vestibule on yellow and red tiles trampled by a horde of visitors' feet. At the same time, he had started rumours among the patients that they were being treated by a schizo, a real loony in a white coat, whom the Institute had forbidden to practice his extremely dubious and scientifically suspect method, someone who would not listen to anyone or anything. But it was all no use. They still went to him. They just flocked to him, people who had been tormented by years of suffering. For all his personal distaste for Danny the Dreamer, the professor recognized the attraction his method must have for it to generate such a consistent, endless, unstoppable stream of people. He recognized it, and the recognition infuriated him more. Well, so what, Pomyakin thought as he drained his second glass. A PhD was not a bulletproof vest, and wouldn't save Buteyko. He would need more than that. You could always find a reason to get rid of a troublemaker, and that was the way things were going, it seemed. He put the glass down on the saucer, placed both on the floor, then rolled onto his right side. He'll be stubborn, of course, but I'll gently encourage him to leave, he thought, on the point of nodding off. People like him don't resign of their own accord. come the hour, we'll ditch the little dreamer.